I was working the front desk at a hotel in Amsterdam when an American guest walked up to me holding a kettle. Not our kettle, his own travel kettle he'd brought from home. He plugged it into the wall socket and the entire thing exploded. Sparks flew everywhere. The smell of burnt plastic filled the lobby. He looked at me like I'd personally sabotaged his morning coffee routine. "Why didn't anyone tell me the electricity here is different?" he demanded. I pointed to the voltage warning label on the wall socket. "Right there?" In 3 languages, including English. He squinted at it and said, "Well, I don't read Dutch." The label was in English, too. I showed him. He just shrugged and asked if we sold kettles. And that's exactly why I started collecting these stories. I don't chase viral moments. I track cultural blind spots in real time. If you appreciate depth over drama, you're already in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Another guest that same week insisted we were scamming him because his room was listed as 18 square meters. He'd done the math on his phone calculator. 18 didn't sound like enough space for a hotel room. I explained that was in metric. Square meters. He asked me to convert it to normal measurements. When I told him it was about 194 square feet, he looked relieved, but then got confused again. "So why don't you just say that on the website?" "Because we're in Europe, sir. We use meters here." He nodded slowly like he understood, but I could tell he didn't really get why. The whole world wouldn't just switch to feet. My coworker told me about a family who checked in and immediately complained about the broken light switches in their room. They'd been flipping them up and down for 10 minutes and nothing happened. Turns out, they didn't know about the key card slot by the door. You have to insert your room key to activate the electricity. Energy saving system. Pretty standard in European hotels. The dad was genuinely amazed by this technology. He kept saying, "Why don't we have this in America? This is genius." And 5 minutes later, he called down because he couldn't figure out how to flush the toilet. There were 2 buttons on top. He'd only tried pushing one. Apparently, the concept of a dual flush system was too advanced. When we explained one button is for liquid waste and one is for solid waste, his wife yelled from the bathroom, "Which one did I just use?" We never got a clear answer on what her emergency was. The best part about working in international hospitality is you develop this 6th sense. You can spot the confusion before it happens. You see an American squinting at a door handle that pushes instead of turns. You watch them try to tip the bus driver who looks uncomfortable because that's not a thing here. You notice them asking where the ice machine is in a country where people don't refrigerate their drinks to frozen temperatures. It's not malicious. It's just this fascinating clash between someone's normal and the rest of the world's normal. And somehow, every single time, the surprise is genuine. I was working as a train conductor in Germany when an American couple got on board without validated tickets. They had tickets. They'd bought them online, printed them out and everything. But in Germany, you sometimes need to validate your ticket at a machine before boarding. These bright yellow machines at every platform. Impossible to miss. They hadn't done it. When I explained they'd need to pay a fine, the husband got defensive immediately. "We paid for these tickets already. You're trying to charge us twice." I showed him the validation stamp requirement printed on his ticket. Right there in the terms. He said he didn't read German. It was also in English. He switched tactics. "This is a scam targeting tourists." "Sir, German people validate their tickets too. It's the system." His wife tried to be diplomatic. She asked if we could just validate them now. I explained that's not how it works. You validate before boarding, not after. They paid the fine, but spent the rest of the journey loudly discussing how European trains were designed to trick people. Another time in France, I watched an American family completely melt down at a train station because their platform number changed 10 minutes before departure. This happens constantly. Platforms change. Everyone just checks the board and walks to the new platform. Simple. But this family acted like they'd been personally victimized. The dad kept repeating, "How are we supposed to know?" while standing directly under a departures board that was updating in real time. They had plenty of time to switch platforms, but instead of moving, they stayed put and argued about whether French trains were reliable. They missed their train, then demanded to speak to someone about a refund because the platform change was inconsistent with American standards of customer service. The ticket agent just stared at them and said, "You are in France." My friend worked at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. She told me about an American passenger who tried to bring a full-size bottle of ranch dressing through security. Not in checked luggage, in his carry-on. When security stopped him, he genuinely didn't understand the problem. "It's just salad dressing." They explained the liquid restrictions. 100 milliliters maximum. He held up the bottle. "This isn't a liquid. It's ranch." He was completely serious. He argued that ranch dressing has a different consistency than water. Therefore, different rules should apply. Security was trying not to laugh. He eventually had to throw it away, but not before giving a speech about how Europe doesn't understand American food culture. The bottle was from a Paris grocery store. He'd bought it in France. This is what fascinates me. The moments where cultural logic collapses. I break these down every week, not for laughs, but to decode why these misunderstandings happen. If that kind of analysis speaks to you, you'll want to be here for the next one. I was bartending in Prague when an American tourist asked me why we didn't accept dollars. I explained we use Czech koruna here. He said he knew that, but couldn't I just take his dollars and figure out the exchange rate myself? I'm a bartender, not a currency exchange. He seemed annoyed that I wouldn't do math in my head to accommodate him. In America, lots of places take other currencies. I didn't have the heart to tell him that's not really true either. He eventually paid with a card, but left me a $1 bill as a tip. On purpose, like it was generous. I still have it somewhere as a souvenir of that interaction. Another guest at the same bar asked me to turn down the music. It was 9 p.m. on a Friday. The music wasn't even that loud. I explained this was normal volume for a Prague bar on a weekend evening. He said in America, bars are quieter, so people can talk. I suggested maybe he wanted a cafe instead of a bar. He looked offended. I want a bar experience. Just a quiet one. That's not really how bars work here. He ended up leaving and writing a negative review online about how Prague bars are too loud for conversation. Multiple locals commented on his review, explaining that bars are supposed to be lively. He replied to every comment, defending himself. I was working at a car rental place in Italy when an American customer refused to accept a manual transmission vehicle. We'd reserved him an economy car. In Italy, most economy cars are manual. Automatic costs extra. He hadn't specified automatic in his booking. But he didn't know how to drive stick shift. Fair enough. We could upgrade him. He'd just need to pay the difference. He lost his mind. You're telling me I have to pay more because your cars are outdated? Manual transmissions aren't outdated here, sir. They're standard. Most Europeans drive manual. He called it a primitive system. Then he asked if we had any normal cars. By normal, he meant automatic. I explained automatic cars are less common in Europe because they're more expensive and use more fuel. He said that proved Europe was behind America technologically. He paid for the upgrade, but complained the entire time about how manual transmission should be illegal. My cousin works at a hotel in Spain. She told me about American guests who reported their shower was broken because the water wouldn't heat up instantly. They'd turned it on, waited 5 seconds, felt cold water, and called maintenance. The maintenance guy explained, "You need to let it run for 30 seconds. That's normal. Hot water has to travel through the pipes." They seemed shocked by this information. In America, it's hot immediately. That's not true in most of America either. But they insisted. They genuinely believed every shower in the United States produces instant hot water. When my cousin gently suggested maybe they'd just never noticed the delay before, they doubled down. One of them said, "I've showered my whole life. I think I'd know." The maintenance guy just nodded and left. I was working as a waiter in Rome when an American couple asked for the check immediately after ordering. Not after eating. After ordering. I thought I'd misunderstood. I asked them to clarify. They repeated they wanted the bill now so they could pay and not wait after finishing their meal. I explained that's not how it works here. You eat first, then you ask for the check. They seemed frustrated by this. We're trying to save time. But you haven't eaten yet. What are you saving time from? They insisted. So I brought them the check. They paid. Then they ate their meal. Then they left. The entire staff was confused. We'd never seen someone so determined to pay before receiving service. Another table that week asked me why their pizza wasn't cut into slices. I explained that in Italy, we serve pizza whole. You eat it with a knife and fork. They looked at me like I'd suggested eating soup with their hands. How are we supposed to share it? You cut it yourself, with the knife and fork? One of them said, "This seems really inefficient." It's literally the same amount of effort. You're just doing the cutting instead of me. But they couldn't get past it. They asked if I could take it back to the kitchen and cut it for them. I did, because arguing wasn't worth it. When I brought it back pre-sliced, they seemed victorious, like they'd won some kind of battle against Italian pizza tradition. I was working at a grocery store in Sweden when an American customer asked where we kept the gallons of milk. We don't sell milk in gallons here. We use liters. He held up a 1-liter carton and said, "This is way too small for a family." I showed him the larger cartons, 2 liters, 3 liters. He wanted to know why we didn't just sell it in gallons. Because we use metric. He did some mental math and figured out a gallon is about 3.8 liters. So why not make a 4-liter carton? That's almost a gallon. Because then it wouldn't be a standard metric measurement. He left without buying milk, muttering about how Europe makes shopping complicated. My friend worked at a cafe in Vienna. She told me about an American customer who got genuinely upset that we didn't have to go cups larger than 500 milliliters. He wanted a large coffee. That was our large. He said in America, a large is at least 20 ounces. I suggested he order 2 mediums. He said that wasn't the point. The point was we should have larger sizes. My friend explained that Austrians don't typically drink huge amounts of coffee at once. We prefer smaller, stronger servings. He called this limiting customer choice. Then he ordered a small, drank it in 30 seconds, and left looking unsatisfied. I was working reception at a gym in Copenhagen when an American member complained that our locker room was too open. We have a communal shower area. Pretty standard in Scandinavian gyms. No private stalls, just an open room with shower heads. He wanted to know if there was a more private option. Not really, no. This is how it's designed. He asked if he could shower in his swimsuit. I mean, technically you can, but people will probably find it strange. He ended up showering at home instead. He told me later he couldn't understand how Europeans were comfortable with that level of exposure. I tried explaining that body shame isn't really part of the culture here. Nudity in appropriate contexts is just normal. He nodded but clearly didn't agree. Another gym member asked me why we didn't have air conditioning. It was summer. The gym was warm, but in Denmark, most buildings don't have AC. It's rarely hot enough to need it. He said he was dying of heat. It was 24 degrees Celsius, about 45 Fahrenheit. I suggested he was probably just adjusting from American AC levels, which tend to be much colder indoors. He said, "So you're telling me Denmark just doesn't believe in comfortable temperatures?" Not quite. We just have a different threshold for what's comfortable. He canceled his membership after 2 weeks. I was working at a pharmacy in the Netherlands when an American tourist asked for painkillers. I showed him paracetamol. He wanted ibuprofen. I showed him ibuprofen. He squinted at the box. Why is everything in Dutch? Because we're in the Netherlands. He asked if we had any medicine with English instructions. I explained the dosage information is universal. Same symbols, same numbers. He didn't trust it. He wanted to see the English version to compare. There was no English version. He left without buying anything and later asked his hotel concierge to help him find American medicine. His hotel was 3 blocks from my pharmacy. My sister works at a public pool in Germany. She told me about an American family who didn't understand the shower before swimming rule. It's posted everywhere. You must shower before entering the pool. No exceptions. The dad argued that he'd showered that morning at his hotel. Doesn't matter. You shower here before swimming. He said it was redundant. My sister explained it's about hygiene. Removing sunscreen, sweat, body oils. He said his family was already clean. She pointed to the sign. He showered, but complained the entire time about excessive German rules. His kids thought the rule made sense. He told them they were wrong. I was working at a bookstore in London when an American customer asked why all our books were in British. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. I said, "You mean English?" He said, "No, British, with the extra U's and stuff." I explained that's just how English is spelled in Britain, and in most English-speaking countries outside America. He seemed surprised by this. So American spelling is the minority? Yes, actually. He bought a book anyway, but mentioned he'd have to adjust to the weird spelling. I was working as a tour guide in Athens when an American tourist asked me if Greece was part of Italy. Not joking, completely serious question. I said no, Greece is its own country. She nodded slowly, then asked, "But it's near Italy, right?" "Yes, relatively close, across the Ionian Sea." She seemed satisfied with that answer, but then followed up with, "So, do you speak Italian here?" "No, we speak Greek." She looked confused. "But isn't all this area kind of the same?" I tried explaining that Southern Europe contains many distinct countries with different languages, cultures, and histories. She said, "Yeah, but it's all Mediterranean, so it's basically similar." I gave up and just continued the tour. Another person on that same tour asked if the Parthenon was built before or after the Roman Empire. I explained the Parthenon was built in the 5th century BC. Rome's empire peaked much later. He said, "So the Greeks copied the Romans?" "No, the other way around. Greek civilization predates Roman. Romans were heavily influenced by Greek culture." He didn't believe me. He'd seen Roman ruins in Italy, and they looked older. I explained that looking weathered doesn't mean older. The Parthenon is actually about 500 years older than most famous Roman structures. He remained skeptical. His wife jumped in and said, "Honey, I think she's right. Greeks were first." He shrugged and took a photo. I was working at a tourist information desk in Dublin when an American visitor asked me what language Irish people speak. I said English. And Irish, though not everyone speaks it fluently. He seemed disappointed. "So you don't have your own language?" "We do. Irish, Gaelic. But most people speak English in daily life." He said, "That's sad. You should speak your original language." I explained it's complicated. Centuries of colonization suppressed Irish language use. We're working on reviving it now. He said, "Well, you should try harder." Then he asked for directions in a very loud, slow voice, as if I might not understand English. "I'm literally speaking English to you right now, sir. My friend worked at a museum in Berlin. She told me about an American school group whose teacher asked if the Berlin Wall was built to keep Americans out during the Cold War. My friend had to politely correct her. The Berlin Wall was built by East Germany to prevent East Germans from escaping to West Berlin. It wasn't about Americans. The teacher looked embarrassed, but tried to save face. Well, it was still part of the tension with America, right? Indirectly, yes. But the wall was primarily about controlling the German population. One of the students asked a better question than the teacher. He wanted to know why families got separated. My friend spent 20 minutes giving them a proper explanation. The teacher barely participated. I was working at a car rental in Brussels when an American customer asked if Belgium was in Germany. I said, "No, Belgium is its own country." He said, "But you're all part of the EU, right? So it's kind of the same." Not exactly. The EU is a political and economic union. Member countries are still independent nations. He waved his hand dismissively. Yeah, but it's basically like states in America. I explained that's not quite accurate. EU countries have their own governments, laws, currencies in some cases, militaries, and complete sovereignty. US states have less autonomy than EU nations. He said, "If you say so," in a tone that suggested he didn't believe me. Another customer that week asked me if people in Belgium speak Belgian. I said we have 3 official languages: Dutch, French, and German, depending on which region you're in. He said, "So there's no Belgian language?" No, Belgium is a multilingual country. He found this confusing. How do you all talk to each other? Most Belgians speak at least 2 of the official languages. Some speak all 3. Plus English. He shook his head. That sounds complicated. In America, everyone just speaks English. I didn't mention the millions of Spanish speakers or the many other languages spoken across the United States. Didn't seem worth it. I was working at a hotel in Edinburgh when an American guest asked if Scotland was still part of England. I said Scotland is part of the United Kingdom, but it's not part of England. They're separate countries within the UK. He said, "But England controls Scotland, right?" Not exactly. Scotland has its own parliament and significant autonomy. He said, "So it's like Texas and the United States?" Not really. The relationship is different. Scotland and England unified in 1707, but maintained distinct legal systems, education systems, and cultural identities. Texas is a U.S. state with less independent authority. He said, "Sounds like the same thing to me." I stopped trying to explain. My cousin worked at a tourist office in Oslo. She told me about an American couple who asked if Norway was socialist. She said Norway is a constitutional monarchy with a social democratic system and a mixed economy. Not socialist in the traditional sense. They seemed confused. But you have free health care. We have universal health care funded through taxes. That's not the same as socialism, they insisted. Free health care is socialism. My cousin tried explaining the difference between social democracy and socialism. They weren't interested. They'd already decided Norway was socialist and nothing would change their minds. They asked if people were allowed to own businesses here. Yes, obviously. Norway has a thriving private sector. They looked surprised. I was working at a bookstore in Montreal when an American tourist asked me why all the signs were in French. I explained that Montreal is in Quebec, a predominantly French-speaking province. He said, "But isn't Canada part of America?" "No, Canada is its own country." He backtracked. "I mean, North America?" "Yes, geographically. But Canada is a separate nation." He said, "You know what I mean. It's basically the same." I assured him it's not. Different government, different currency, different laws, different history. He bought a book about Canadian history, in English. He didn't buy the French version. I was working at an airport information desk in Zurich when an American passenger asked me why his flight was delayed. I checked the screen. "Weather in London?" He asked why Swiss weather was causing problems in London. I explained the weather issue was in London, not Switzerland. His flight was going to London. The weather there was causing the delay. He said, "But the plane is here right now." "Yes, but it can't land in London safely until the weather clears." He processed this for a moment, then asked, "Can't it just fly around the weather?" "Not how that works." He sat down to wait, visibly annoyed that meteorology wasn't accommodating his schedule. Another traveler that day asked me if Switzerland used the euro. I said no, we use Swiss francs. He held up a 50-euro note. "But this works here, right? Some places might accept it, but you'll get a bad exchange rate. Better to use francs or a card." He seemed put out by this. "Why doesn't all of Europe just use the same money?" I explained that not all European countries are in the Eurozone. Switzerland, Norway, UK, and others have their own currencies. He said it would be easier if everywhere used the same thing. I agreed that would simplify travel. He asked if I thought it would happen soon. I said probably not. He looked disappointed. The reality is these moments happen every single day, not out of malice. Not because Americans are uniquely confused. It's just what happens when someone's entire framework for how the world works suddenly doesn't apply. The measurements are different. The social norms are different. The infrastructure is different. And instead of adapting, there's often this assumption that the American way is default and everywhere else is the variation. It creates these perfect little collision moments where both sides are baffled by each other. I've worked in hospitality and tourism for years across 4 different countries. The stories never stop. Every week brings new confusion about voltage, tipping, water service, date formats, 24-hour clocks, roundabouts, Celsius, military time, B-days, and whether ice should be provided without asking. Each story is a tiny window into how completely different normal can be, depending on where you grew up. And honestly, it's fascinating. Not frustrating. Just endlessly, genuinely fascinating. The American guests who explode kettles and argue about pizza slicing aren't trying to be difficult. They're just navigating a world that doesn't match their expectations. And the rest of us are navigating their surprise. It's cultural dissonance in real time. Sometimes funny, sometimes awkward, always memorable. And trust me, these stories never stop coming. Every border crossing, every hotel check-in, every restaurant meal brings a new chance for someone to discover that their normal isn't universal. That's just how the world works when you actually go out and see it. I'll keep exploring these cross-cultural collisions, whether you subscribe or not. But the people who do, they're the ones turning these stories into perspective. If that's your wavelength, you already know what to do.